Welcome everybody, thanks for being here. If you need to move forward, there are going to be a lot of graphics on the slides and that, so hopefully you can see those okay. By show of hands, how many people have used ModelBuilder before? Okay, great. That'll be really helpful to hopefully get into some more of the nitty-gritty stuff if you guys want to. Hopefully I can get through this fast enough that we can have a little dialogue along the way, so if you have questions, maybe for Eric's sake, just shout it out and I'll repeat the question so you don't have to run around. I'm happy to kind of dialogue as we go through this if you have questions, but hopefully get into some specific examples. So you all, most of you have used ModelBuilder before. You're probably around the concept of you can take advantage of all of the analysis tools that are available to you in the toolbox, and even some that you might have to have extensions for. So there's a lot of opportunity there to make use of it. So some of the topics we'll cover today is what is ModelBuilder, some tips that you might not know about, or maybe you already do, some real examples that I use or have used in the past, and then some question and discussion, hopefully. So what is ModelBuilder? This is on Esri's website. It's a visual programming language for building geoprocessing workflows. So you can combine tools and their outputs together using ModelBuilder. So if you're a visual person like I am, this is way more easy for me to understand and start playing with and figuring things out than trying to sit down and write some Python. Easier point of entry, being a GIS professional and just knowing how some of these tools work individually and just trying to string them together to make something even bigger and powerful. You can build a model by adding and connecting data and tools. So here's an example of a buffer. Hopefully everybody's used the buffer tool before. Let's see, where my pointer here. So the buffer tool is in the analysis tools toolbox and in the proximity tool set. And all these toolboxes and tool sets have many tools in them. So you got tons of tools at your disposal to do interesting things with, right? And the dialog that it looks like in Pro is something like this. So in this example, we're just grabbing a parcel and we're setting a 100-foot buffer on it to generate this red shaded area. So something really, really basic, like the first presentation that Jim did. Some of these initial examples might be really basic, but it's just meant to get the point across. We'll look at hopefully some more interesting stuff later. So then in ModelBuilder, where you're doing this geoprocessing operation, you're using the buffer tool. You're using your parcels as an input parameter to the buffer tool, as well as a distance for the parameter for the buffer tool, and you're getting your output result. That's how that would look in ModelBuilder. And then you can expand on that and add additional tools to that. For example, using this output here as an input to the next tool, as an example. And how do you create a model if you're not familiar with that? I'm just showing a folder directory here where I right-clicked and I said I want to create a new toolbox, and then I named it my new toolbox, and then I right-clicked on the toolbox and I said I want to create a new model. And that's the name that I gave to this model. So just some quick basic fundamental steps. So I took that, once I had that kind of empty workspace created, it's just basically a blank template, and I dropped the buffer tool from here into my empty slate and configured it. So some tips. We'll look at memory output, inline variable substitution, feature sets. There are also record sets, and then configuring a Python script tool. We'll look at that. So continuing with the buffer example, if you aren't aware, I guess show of hands again. Anybody used this before, the memory? Okay. So basically in ArcMap, you could use in_ memory, and in Pro, you just use memory. Say, for example, this buffer that we're creating in the very first step, that's just really intermediate information. We don't need to save that to a geodatabase. We don't want it. We just need it temporarily to run the next step, and then we're done with it. Or we only want to add it to our map, but we don't want to access it in the future. We're just playing around or testing whatever. You can write it to memory. You can add it to your Pro project to see it in the map, and then you can you close your Pro project, it's gone. It was in memory, it's not there anymore, but it was available to you for a short period of time. So you can do that just by saying in your output, this is the Pro example, where I want this output to go is just memory buffer area is what I'm calling it. So just a little tip there if you aren't familiar with that already. Inline substitution, I'll use the same example, but there's better ways to use the inline substitution. But let's say instead of putting memory directly into here, we're going to allow the user of the model to define, whoops, sorry about that. We're going to allow the user to define where they want the output location to be when they're running the model. Right here, I've put memory in there as the kind of the default, but they could change that if they have a file geodatabase that they want to enter as the path for that output. But then in this case, when I'm running the buffer, because I want the output location to be available to be determined by the user of the model, I've set that up as a string right here, and it's a separate variable. So they can leave it memory or they can switch it, but when I'm setting up the buffer tool for the output location, I'm just saying sorry about that again, these buttons are right next to each other. The output location, whatever the user puts into there is going to feed into here because I'm saying take whatever's in output location and use that as the destination for the buffer area. So you just put the percents on each side of that there to call it into this tool here. So that can be really useful. There are some tools that Esri has that doesn't allow you to, let's say this buffer area I couldn't use that for some reason to connect it directly to the next tool that I want to run. You could call it by saying percent buffer area percent, and it'll know you want to take this and feed it into that next tool if it can't connect it. So just another tip there. Feature sets. Anybody used feature sets before? Some of these things are kind of rare, but these are all online. You can look them up. Esri has documentation for these things, but I found that a lot of people don't know about these unless they really get into ModelBuilder and start digging around and find a scenario where they need to do something and they don't know how to do it, and these are some additional things that are out there. So the feature set, again, this is allowing for more interaction with the model by the desktop user. So I'm defining here a feature set as my input, and my buffer distance is here. So these got switched around versus the last slide. But same example with a buffer, since it's an easy one to talk around. The feature set here, it allows you this pencil icon here when the user goes to run the model. And so you can choose to create a point, a line, or a polygon, or a series of them. So in this example, I'm choosing the feature set option of a line, and in my Pro, I'm actually sketching this feature. So that allows me to have a user input for what the tool or the model is going to use as the input to the model. So again, a 100-foot buffer, but in this case, I was able to manually interact in the desktop in Pro to sketch this, because maybe I don't have a feature that represents what I want to buffer already. I want to be able to dynamically choose where that location is, if it's a point or a polygon or a line. All right, configuring Python script tools. So let's say you're creating some models. There's this really time-consuming process that you're trying to figure out some kind of automated solution for. And you got almost all of it done in ModelBuilder, but you get stumped. There's one step that you need to do, and you can't figure out, how do I do this next step? And let's say you go online and you find the perfect answer for it, but it's in Python, and you don't know Python, or you just want to use that solution, but in your model. You have to know a little bit about Python to be able to kind of dissect it and set it up as a geoprocessing tool to be able to feed into your model. But this example here just shows this definition for this tool. It's calling the geo layer, the at layer, and the common field. And down here, you can see that each of those is being called out as a parameter. So think of this like a geoprocessing tool that's asking for 3 inputs. That's basically what this Python script is doing. So if I wanted to set this up as a script tool, and then that would allow me to drop that into a model, that will look something like this. So back to my new toolbox, I just right-click on there and I say I want to create a new script tool. And that's kind of like just an empty template that you're configuring into. And when you set the parameter settings for that, that's where you have to know, like, what is this Python script doing? But you can configure that to say, okay, it's asking for 3 inputs. So that's how I have to configure this script tool so that it runs like it's a geoprocessing tool. So here is the geo layer, the label and the name. It's a feature layer and its required input. The attribute layer, its name, it's a feature layer, its required input. The common field is a string and it's a required input. With those 3 pieces, that could fit into a model, something like this. So if you just opened up the script tool itself, it would look something like this. It's asking for those 3 pieces of information to be able to execute. If you drop it into a model, it looks like another geoprocessing tool, and it's asking for 3 inputs to be able to run. So some examples. These are some that I've just came up with and I might not have used on the job, but I thought I might, or some that I use all the time or have used in the past. So the first one here, mailing list. So buffer address list. Continuing with the buffer example. So in here, we were looking at the feature set and a distance to do a buffer on, and then to take that, really use ModelBuilder for what it's for and create this whole geoprocessing sequence, not just one tool. You would just run the tool if it was only one step. But if you want to do multiple steps to get an end result, you're going to string all of those together. So if we take our buffer and then we're going to do a selection of the buffer area against something, and then we can take those selected features that came off of the buffer selection and export those to Excel. Hopefully, if that's something that you're doing over and over again as a part of your job, you could create a model and you can just say, okay, I know how this process goes. I do this all the time. I've got a geoprocessing operation, a model that can handle that. I know what it needs as input, and it spits out the information that I need. So a pretty basic example, but visually, here's what it would look like. So we're using the feature set example again for sketching the line itself. Doing a 100-foot buffer. In reality, you're probably doing something more than 100, but this is just a basic example. And then the selection, we're saying, well, let's select the parcels that are within that 100-foot buffer. And we know our parcel data has all our address and owner information on it. So then that's what we're exporting to Excel to get something like this table here in Excel. You could do some additional manipulation if this tool allows you to hide some fields and things like that. Or before you take it to the export to Excel, you could maybe do a export feature or feature to table or something like that, and you could, those tools might allow you to, strip off dozens of extra fields that you don't need for your address list or something like that. So here's an example. I built this recently. It's for exporting utility data. So anybody else work on utility data day to day? Okay. So if you're getting data requests all the time, we need the storm sewer information for this neighborhood or for the whole city, or we need all your utilities for this area, or what have you. This might look kind of crazy, but I'm mostly demonstrating mostly this function here. So I basically have a Pro project that has all this utility data in it, and this is just my way of being able to quickly do the export. So none of this stuff is lit up because I haven't defined exactly what I want this to do, but if I did set a default, it would start to light some of these up. That's just how ModelBuilder works. If you feed it the information, it can start verifying or validating. Does that make sense? Yes, okay, I can light these up that this is configured. This is kind of like It's fine to have it set up like this as long as you have everything accounted for. Once you go to run the model here and you drop in those different pieces of information, it has all the pieces it needs to run and it'll run, even though this isn't all lit up. So in this case, I've tried to make this kind of as flexible as possible. So I'm exporting utility data to a file geodatabase, and I'm defining that this is like our standard location where we put all of our data requests. So I'm defining that. I want that to be known for sure. Everything needs to go here. But I'm adding the flexibility of the folder name. How do you want to save the folder name? Because there is a create folder portion of the tool right here. So the name of this input here can be used as feedback for the user of the model to give them an example of how I want you to name it, if you have a certain naming convention that you want them to follow. But basically, they could put whatever they want in here. And if they don't like this output directory, they could change that too if they wanted to. It's not required. It's just, this is the default. I know that's where I want mine to go, so I'm going to set that up as the default every time I open this. And then here we've got the file geodatabase name, and that's feeding into this create geodatabase. So every time I run this, I need to create a new geodatabase before I export the data into that geodatabase. So that's the whole idea here, is create the folder in which the database is going to go into, create the database in which the data is going to go into. And then all of these Booleans here, all these right here are just questions that I created. It's basically a yes, no. And right now, they're all unchecked. It's an empty box, the way that I set these up. But I set them as preconditions to the next tool. When you connect a Boolean or a string or anything, whenever you connect something to a tool, it'll ask you, is this input? Is this a precondition? What is this? So that's just a setting to say, you need to have this before you can run that. If you don't have this, this will not run. So I've set that up, and this is how it shows up when somebody goes to run the model itself. It just shows a bunch of checkboxes. So if I get a request only for storm data for the whole city, I don't have to go to a separate model. It's accounted for here because I've built that kind of flexibility in here. I can just say, I want all of the storm. And I just check the storm ones that I want. It'll run only the storm configured operations. So in this case, if I did storm manholes, here's my storm manholes precondition, right? My Boolean. So checking that there basically turns this green, as an example, which would allow this to take place then as well. But the rest of these are not, sorry. The rest of these are not, so they would actually get skipped. So the model would run fast because it's only exporting one data set, it's not doing all of them. So you get the idea, and then obviously I'm running this in Pro, so I can make a selection if I want to. So then ModelBuilder, all these tools, they're going to honor a selection on any of these. So if I have a selection of only 10 manholes and I only check this box, it's only going to export 10 manholes. But if I need just like a whole neighborhood and I need all the utilities, I'll check all of these, but I'll have a selection just for that neighborhood of my features in Pro. And so all of these will just export the selected, but all of them will run if I check all of these. So hopefully giving you guys some real world examples of how you can kind of interface between Pro and your models and different ways you can kind of set those up. For attribution, you can create models. This is a model, so we have IDs on our manholes, and we have up and down manhole IDs on our mains. So on each end of a main, you have a manhole, and I don't want to type that in every single time. I can use a spatial proximity. I'm using the near table, or sorry, I'm using the near here as a way to say, take my endpoint of my pipe and tell me what is the manhole there. And then having those IDs in that near result, I can join that back to my mains and say this is my downstream or this is my upstream and just do field calculates. So I can do this for a whole area at a time. I don't have to manually do data entry for every single manhole up and manhole down on every single pipe. Okay. What else here? Oh, I do have to say, if you were in the first session, Jim made a great point, and it deserves repeating. If you're not familiar with ModelBuilder and some of these geoprocessing tools, be very careful about using the tools on your production data. Usually, my first steps when I'm working with production data is I'm doing some type of export step so that I'm not, like this add field, that will add a field to your production data. You usually do not want to do those kinds of things because it's trying to change the schema of your data, which you don't want to mess around with that kind of stuff. Your GIS administrator will be ready to shoot you if you do like a near. There are a couple different near tools. A near will do the near and it'll append fields onto your data. But the near table is a separate option. A near table actually creates a table that does basically the same thing, but it's not actually putting those fields on your data that you're feeding into that tool. So just be careful what tools you're using and what they're doing to your data. And I believe at Pro, Esri is actually warning you now in some of the tool dialogues that, warning, this tool does affect your input data. So that's a good thing. It's trying to protect you from accidentally doing something that you don't want to your data. But in this case, I'm taking the mains, and I'm doing feature vertices to points on one end of the main and feature vertices to points on the other end of the main to get both sets of points, and then doing my near analysis with the manholes there. And then those have the original IDs from the mains to be able to join this back to there and do field calcs, and join this back to there and do the field calcs. How are we doing on time here? 6 minutes, okay. Data cleanup. So let me jump to the slide here. It's easier to look at the picture. So in this case, we have some GPS data. If you know what marker balls are, they're a device that they can GPS when these laterals are put in the ground and there's a trench in the ground. So we can digitize those easily and snap to them, but our end goal for our utility system is to have a whole connected network. So we actually want our lateral lines to be snapped to these, not only the marker balls, but extended to the mains as well. So here's an example of a tool that I use that says, allow me to select some laterals and a main that I want them to be extended to. So you can do that extending manually one by one, or maybe you have some other rules or productivity tools at your disposal. Esri has many ways you can do the same thing, but this is, I know ModelBuilder pretty well, so I thought, well, I can make a model for that, so I did. So it basically just turns them into this. So it's just an extension of the lines. There will be a vertex at the start and at the other GPS point, but then we've extended it to be snapped to the main, so now they have 3 vertices instead of 2. And if I do, we use a trace network for our utilities. So if I do some tracing on my utilities, I have a way to kind of export this data and configure it for a trace network, and we can get it to trace along the laterals as well, not just the mains and the manholes and such. Other examples of data creation. Tried to fit this model, make it as big as possible here, but water lateral lines. So kind of a similar example, except I'm not extending features, I'm creating features basically out of nowhere, right? So here are some curb stops or service valves for the water system. This is a new construction area, and I've selected those. Obviously, I can do this for a whole neighborhood or for the whole city if we didn't have water lateral lines, but we have all of our points for our service valves. So similar concept, I'm saying from this point, I want to draw a line to the nearest main. So actually I think there's I can't read it from here, but there should be the near table somewhere in here. It looks like I'm using near here, but again, I'm exporting the data over here. Feature class to feature class, I believe, is getting deprecated, so export features would be its replacement if you needed to. But the near has an option to say, tell me the xy of the near feature. So if I have the xy coordinates of these points, and the near gives me an xy of the nearest main, I can use those xy's to construct a line between them. So we can turn that into something like that. I didn't sketch any of those lines. The model did the lines for me. We just said, those points, we want to connect them to the nearest main, and I've selected it, so I have a little bit of influence on what the model is going to process as far as the data goes. And then we set a portion of the model is constructing this portion here, which is in the opposite direction at a distance of 30 feet, is just a number that we decided on. Similarly with easements, if anybody's doing parcel mapping or if you're doing easement mapping, okay. Here's an example of taking the parcel lines that we have and then their parcels around them as a selection. I'm just showing in yellow the lines from the original. And we're just doing a buffer of those, let's say by 10 feet, and then we're doing an intersect with the underlying parcels. All of those polygons, there's one for every single parcel at a 10-foot distance. And if anybody's doing parcel dimension annotations by hand, if you're doing coordinate geometry and you have your COGO fields on your data, you have all that parcel dimension information. So why not do a label and convert that label to annotation? You can do those kinds of things. So be thinking about your workflows, and anything that's time consuming or a lot of data entry, or if you're doing data entry twice anywhere, think about how you might be able to create a geoprocessing operation to help you with that, streamline it a little bit and save you some time. We got maybe a minute, it sounds like, for questions, if anybody has questions.
Yeah, we probably have time for one question if anyone has one.
Going back to the Python script that you added, could you talk about making sure that you have, ensuring you have an output if you need to keep going on?
So back here?
Yeah, so at the end there, I'm not very intelligent on Python, but I've noticed I've always run into issues of making sure there's an output so I can continue on.
Sure. So in this example, this tool actually does an operation, but it does not have an output. But in this case, it's the last step in my model, so I don't think I needed an additional output. But yes, if you needed the Python script to have an output, that would be in the script somewhere itself, and you would have to set that up as an output. So instead of, these are all set as input directions, but if it had a component that it actually produced something as an output, you could configure that as output, and it would be, the direction would be output. So then when you get to here, it would have that piece that comes off the end of, after that operation.
Maybe you can repeat this. What if it's just a calculation and you're just trying to do something and then move on so I can tell me output?
Yeah, so if the tool doesn't actually output something, I'm not quite sure. Maybe somehow you could maybe set up like a precondition. I'm not, yeah, that's probably more like begging the question, why use Python in that case? Or if you have to use Python, you might have to expand on the Python code to make sure that it has an output that you can set as a precondition or an input to another tool that needs to run after it. Yeah.
Let's thank all our speakers this morning, Jim, Jess, and Steve.